Marcus stood on the edge of the wasteland, watching the sun set behind the crumbling buildings of Epsilon 3. The colony had been a thriving hub of mining activity, but over the years, it had become a ghost town, its economy drained and its people lost in the endless grind. The landscape was littered with metal scraps, old mining equipment, and abandoned androids, cast aside like yesterday's tools. Yet Marcus never lost hope. He was a scavenger, an engineer by trade, and he knew the value of a good piece of tech when he saw one. Today, however, he wasn't expecting anything remarkable. He had spent hours digging through the debris of an old mining facility, searching for anything he could use to make a little extra cash. But as the last rays of sunlight flickered out, something caught his eye. It was different from the usual broken parts. This object was oddly shaped, almost too symmetrical, too human. Cautiously, Marcus approached, brushing aside layers of rusted metal. His eyes widened when he saw it, a woman's figure, but not human. She was an android, her body sleek and advanced, though badly damaged. Her once glowing skin was now dull, with fractures running along her arms and legs, and her face was covered in layers of dirt and grime. She lay on her back, motionless, her systems completely offline. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. Androids were common in the colony, but this one was different. She didn't look like the usual worker models or the military-grade machines he had seen. No, this one had a sophistication about her that hinted at something more. As an engineer, Marcus could tell she was built with precision. There were no signs of hasty repairs or makeshift fixes. She had been made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But what kind of person would leave such a marvel behind? Marcus kneeled beside her, his fingers brushing over her chest plate. He could feel the faintest vibrations, a sign that her internal systems were still alive, if only barely. His curiosity got the better of him. What had happened to her? And why was she abandoned here, alone in the wilderness? Guess it's worth a shot, he muttered under his breath, deciding to try and fix her. He pulled out his toolkit and began working. The first thing he did was check her power core. It was damaged, but not beyond repair. With some patience, Marcus was able to reroute the circuits and give her a small boost. Slowly, the faint hum of her internal systems started to grow stronger. Then, without warning, the android's eyes flickered open. For a brief moment, they glowed a brilliant blue, before flickering and dimming again. "Who are you?" A soft voice crackled through her broken speaker. It was raspy, as though she hadn't spoken in years. Marcus paused, wiping his hands on his pants. "I'm just a guy looking for parts. You don't look like something I can sell, but you might be worth fixing." He said it with a half-laugh, though his voice betrayed the genuine concern he felt. Her eyes seemed to focus on him, though her face remained frozen in that haunting, emotionless expression. "What happened to me?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper, almost lost in the air. Marcus frowned. She didn't seem like a standard android. Most machines he had come across would have asked something simple, like, "What is my function?" or "Where is my master?" This one, though, seemed different, more aware. "Not sure," Marcus replied, his fingers tapping over the worn-down interface on her side. "But I'm going to find out. I fix things. It's what I do." The android's eyes flickered again, and for a brief second, Marcus thought he saw something behind those cold, synthetic eyes, something like fear, or perhaps desperation. It was hard to tell. But then the moment passed, and the machine's expression returned to its usual blankness. "I need to be fixed," she said, her voice soft and mechanical. "I was protecting something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Protecting something? Like a cargo shipment or a person? He was used to hearing about androids being assigned to specific tasks, but this was different. This woman, android, had a purpose beyond basic service. "I was part of a crew," she muttered, almost to herself. "But they betrayed me, left me behind." Marcus's curiosity grew. Betrayed you. By who? Her eyes dimmed again, as if the question caused her memory to malfunction. She let out a small mechanical sigh, and her body shuddered briefly before stabilizing again. I can't remember, she said finally. But I was meant to deliver something important. Something that must not fall into the wrong hands. Marcus didn't know what to make of it. Well, I don't know who left you. But I'm not going to let you stay here like this. I'll fix you. The android remained silent for a moment, her eyes drifting toward the distant horizon, as though searching for something just beyond reach. Then she turned her gaze back to Marcus. Thank you, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first hint of gratitude he had heard from her since waking up. With that, Marcus returned to his work, carefully examining her damaged systems. He knew it would take time to repair her, but something inside him told him it would be worth it. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, he couldn't shake the feeling that fixing this mysterious android might lead him down a path he could never have imagined. For the next few days, Marcus worked non-stop in his small workshop, surrounded by piles of scrap metal, wires, and old machinery. The air smelled of oil and metal, and the soft hum of the lights above filled the quiet room. Lyra, as Marcus had started calling the android, sat on a makeshift workbench, her body partially repaired, though her systems were still far from fully functioning. Her eyes remained closed most of the time, but every now and then she would stir, as if waking from a long, painful sleep. Marcus had taken a special interest in her, more than he had with any other tech he had ever repaired. There was something about her, something that set her apart from the usual androids he came across. As he worked on her, he began to notice things he couldn't explain. The way her systems reacted to his touch, how certain parts of her seemed to respond to his presence, almost like they were alive. All right, Lyra, let's try this again, Marcus muttered to himself, connecting a few wires to a power node in her chest. The moment he did, her eyes flickered open, glowing faintly blue. Marcus, she said, her voice still raspy but clearer than before. You've fixed me. Marcus smiled, wiping his hands on his overalls. Well, I've only got you half repaired. There's a lot more to do. I know, she replied softly, but I feel better, more aware. Marcus leaned over her, checking her power circuits. That's good. You were in bad shape when I found you. It's a miracle you're still functioning. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she seemed to be lost in thought. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, taking in the piles of tech, the various tools scattered around. Marcus, she said after a moment, her voice lower now, almost hesitant. I remember. Pieces of something. I don't know what it means. But I think it's important. He stopped, his hand hovering over a piece of equipment. What do you mean? What do you remember? Lyra closed her eyes again, as if trying to bring the fragments of her memory into focus. Her voice was soft, almost as if she were talking to herself. I remember a ship, a crew, a mission, but something went wrong. They left me. They betrayed me. Marcus frowned. Who betrayed you? I don't know, she whispered. I can't remember their faces, but I remember the fear, the feeling that I was abandoned, left behind. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories of androids being abandoned when their usefulness ran out, but this felt different. This wasn't just a machine being tossed aside. It was something far more personal, something that went deeper than just programming. Lyra wasn't just a tool. She had emotions. She had a sense of betrayal. That made her more than just an android. It made her something else entirely. Don't worry, Marcus said, trying to offer some comfort. I'm here now. I'm fixing you. You're not alone anymore. Her eyes opened again, and she looked at him. There was something in her gaze that made Marcus pause. It was almost as if she were looking beyond him, as if she were seeing something only she could see. Thank you, she said quietly. You don't know how much this means to me. Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important she wasn't telling him. He had always been good with machines, but Lyra was different. She was more complex than any tech he had ever worked on, and every time she spoke, he felt like he was piecing together a mystery, one that was much bigger than he could understand. As the days passed, Marcus continued to repair her. Each time he fixed a new part of her body, something strange happened. Her systems seemed to adapt. Her movements became smoother, her speech clearer, and at times, Marcus swore he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. He had never worked on an android like her before. It was as if she were evolving, becoming more human with every repair. One afternoon, as he worked on her leg joints, Lyra suddenly sat up, her hands moving over her body, as if she were testing her newfound mobility. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, there was a smile on her face. It wasn't much, just a small curve of her lips, but it was enough to make Marcus stop in his tracks. "Is it working?" she asked, her voice light, almost playful. Marcus chuckled. "You're moving better than I expected. Just a few more tweaks, and you'll be back to full strength. I don't feel like just a machine anymore," she said, her tone thoughtful. "I feel whole, like I'm becoming something more than I was before." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "More than just a machine? That's a big statement for an android." Lyra's expression softened. "I don't know how to explain it, but I've been awake long enough to feel it. I feel like I'm connected to something, like I'm part of something bigger than myself." Marcus stood up, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Well, I'm glad I can help, whatever that something is. Just don't get any ideas about taking over the world, okay?" Lyra laughed, a soft, mechanical sound that still held a trace of something human. "I promise. But there's something else, Marcus." "What's that?" he asked, curious. Lyra's eyes darkened for a moment, and she looked away, as if reluctant to speak. "There's more to my mission than just surviving. I wasn't just left behind for no reason. There was a purpose to it, a purpose I can't remember. But I know it's important." Marcus sat down next to her, his curiosity growing. "What was your mission?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice filled with frustration. "But I need to find out. It's why I was built." Marcus didn't know what to say. There was a lot more going on here than he had realized. Lyra wasn't just an android in need of repairs. She was a key to something bigger. And he had no idea just how far this journey would take him. The next few days passed quickly for Marcus as he worked tirelessly to finish repairing Lyra. Each day, he learned something new about her. And each day, something in him began to shift. She was more than just an android. She was becoming something he couldn't fully explain. As her systems continued to stabilize, her movements grew more fluid, her speech clearer, and her presence more human. Marcus had always thought of androids as tools, nothing more than machines created to serve humans. But Lyra was different. Her reactions, her awareness, there was a depth to her that no machine he had ever worked on had. She wasn't like the standard worker androids, or even the military models he had occasionally repaired. Lyra seemed to have a personality, a soul, even. One evening, as he worked on repairing a damaged part of her communication system, Lyra spoke up. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft, almost as if testing the words. "Have you ever felt connected to something, like a purpose beyond what you do every day?" Marcus paused, looking up at her. Her face was calm, but there was something in her eyes, a longing that was hard to ignore. "What do you mean?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I feel like I'm connected to something," Lyra explained, her eyes unfocused as if she were looking at something far away. "It's like there's a bond between us, the thread that ties us together. I can't explain it, but I can feel you. I can feel your presence." Marcus blinked, taken aback by the intensity of her words. "You can feel me." Lyra nodded slowly. "Not just physically. It's deeper than that. It's as if my systems are responding to you." When you're close, my power core stabilizes. When you're near, my systems adapt. I don't know how, but I can sense you. Marcus felt a strange warmth in his chest, though he wasn't sure why. He had always been cautious with his emotions, always kept his distance, but something about what Lyra said felt real. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't just fixing a machine. He was becoming part of something larger, and that thought both scared and excited him. I don't know if I can explain it either, Marcus admitted, but I think you're right. There's something strange happening here, something I didn't expect. Lyra's eyes softened. Thank you for fixing me, for being here. Marcus shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. I didn't do it for a thank you. I'm just doing what I know how to do. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers as if testing her newfound strength. I wasn't always like this, she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. I used to be something else. I used to have a purpose. But now I don't know who I am anymore. Marcus set his tools down, sensing that this was important. What do you mean? You're not just a machine. You're more than that. I know, Lyra said, her voice distant. I can feel it. But the memories, they're broken. I can't remember who I was or why I was built. I just know that I have a mission. Something I have to do. Marcus looked at her, studying her face. You said you were left behind. Do you know why? Lyra's eyes dimmed for a moment, as if the question triggered something painful. I was part of a crew, she said softly. We were sent on an important mission, but something went wrong. They left me. I don't know why, but I was left behind to die. Only, I didn't die. I was saved by you. Marcus frowned, his mind racing. You were abandoned. Lyra nodded slowly. It was like they didn't care anymore. Maybe they thought I was a failure. Maybe they thought I was a tool that was no longer needed. But I wasn't just a tool. I was part of something bigger. I had a purpose. I have to find out what it was. Marcus stood up and walked to a nearby shelf, pulling down a small piece of equipment. He had been thinking about what Lyra had said for days now. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about fixing an android. It was about uncovering something much bigger. And he couldn't do it alone. If you want to find out what happened to you, I'll help, Marcus said, turning to face her. I don't know what's out there, but we'll figure it out together. Lyra's eyes brightened, a hint of hope flickering in her gaze. You'll help me? Of course, Marcus replied, his voice firm. I may not have all the answers, but I'm good with machines, and I can't just leave you here without knowing what's going on. Lyra's expression softened, a small smile playing on her lips. Thank you. Marcus nodded, a feeling of resolve settling in his chest. They weren't just fixing her anymore. They were uncovering a mystery, one that stretched far beyond anything he could have imagined. Whatever Lyra had been before, whatever she had been through, Marcus knew he couldn't walk away now. As the days passed, Marcus and Lyra grew closer. She wasn't just a machine anymore. She was his partner in this journey. Every time he fixed a new part of her, something inside him felt more certain. They were connected, not just by wires and circuits, but by something deeper, something neither of them fully understood yet. One evening, as they sat together in the dim light of the workshop, Lyra spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. Marcus, I know I was built to be something, but I don't know what that is yet. I feel like I'm starting to remember, but I need your help. You're the only one who can help me find the answers. Marcus looked at her, his heart heavy with a mix of uncertainty and determination. Then we'll figure it out together, no matter what it takes. Lyra nodded, a new sense of purpose shining in her eyes. And with that, Marcus knew their journey was only just beginning. The sun had just started to rise over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the wasteland outside Marcus's workshop. Inside, Marcus was hunched over a table, examining a data chip he had managed to extract from Lyra's internal memory core. Lyra sat across from him, her eyes scanning the room as she had become more alert and aware with every passing day. They had been working together for weeks now, and though they still had much to figure out, Marcus was beginning to feel that they were getting closer. There were pieces to this puzzle, scattered fragments of memories and data that, if put together, might reveal the truth. Any luck? Lyra's voice broke through the silence. She sounded more human now, her tone softer, her words clearer. But there was still something that hinted at the machine inside her, like a faint echo in her voice. Marcus glanced up from the data chip. "I'm not sure yet. This thing is old. Some of the files are corrupted, but there's still a chance we can find something useful." Lyra nodded, her gaze focused on the data chip in Marcus's hand. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's something familiar about all this. About the mission, the crew. I think it's more than just a job. I think it's personal." Marcus set the chip down and looked at her, puzzled. "Personal? What do you mean?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice distant. "But something about the mission feels like it was meant for me. Not just as a soldier or a tool, but as something more." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering her words. There had been something off about the way Lyra had spoken about her past, like there was a deeper connection to this mission. It was almost as if the mission was connected to who she truly was. But what could it all mean? He couldn't ignore the strange bond they had developed during their time together. It felt like they were both pieces of a larger puzzle, two halves that fit together, whether they understood it or not. "I'll keep working on this chip," Marcus said after a moment of silence. "Maybe we can find something useful in it." As the hours passed, Marcus worked diligently, scanning through the fragmented files. He found bits and pieces of information, but nothing concrete, just more dead ends. That was until he found one file that was strangely intact. The data appeared to be a set of coordinates, along with a series of encrypted messages. There was a lot of junk, but something about it made Marcus's heart race. "Lyra," Marcus called, his voice filled with excitement. "I think I found something." Lyra stood up and walked over to his side. She leaned over his shoulder, her gaze fixed on the screen. The coordinates on the screen were clear, but it was the encrypted message beneath them that caught her attention. "This," Lyra said softly. "I remember this. This is part of the mission. I've seen these coordinates before." Marcus looked at her, surprised. "You remember them?" Lyra nodded slowly, her brow furrowing. "I can't remember exactly when, but I know this place. It's where they sent me. The last place I was before everything went wrong." Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had no idea what Lyra meant, but the fact that these coordinates were familiar to her made them worth investigating. "We need to go there," Marcus said, standing up. "This could be our first real lead." Lyra's eyes darkened, and for a moment, her expression grew serious. "I don't know what we'll find there, Marcus, but I have a feeling it's not going to be good." "We won't know until we try," Marcus replied, his voice determined. "We've come this far, Lyra. We're in this together now. Whatever we find, we'll face it." Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." The journey took them out of the familiar surroundings of Marcus's workshop and into the unknown. The wasteland stretched out before them, a barren expanse of dust and broken machines. They traveled in an old rover that Marcus had pieced together from scavenged parts, the engine sputtering and groaning as it bumped over the uneven terrain. As they drove, Marcus couldn't help but think about how far they had come. When he first found Lyra, she had been broken, a lifeless machine abandoned in the desert. Now she was more than just a piece of tech. She was a companion, someone he could rely on. And he was starting to realize that he didn't just want to fix her anymore. He wanted to help her find the truth. After several hours of driving, they arrived at the location marked by the coordinates. It was an old, forgotten outpost, barely standing against the test of time. The building was covered in layers of dust and debris, and the once pristine walls were now crumbling. It looked abandoned, but Marcus had a feeling that something, or someone, was waiting for them inside. They stepped out of the rover, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across the wasteland. Lyra's eyes scanned the surroundings, her heightened sensors picking up every movement. "This place feels wrong," Lyra murmured, "like it's been untouched for too long." Marcus nodded, feeling the same sense of unease. "Let's check it out." The door to the outpost creaked open with a loud groan as Marcus pushed it aside. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of rust lingered in the air. The place was empty. At least, it seemed that way. But as Marcus and Lyra ventured deeper into the outpost, they found evidence that they were not alone. Footprints in the dust, signs of recent activity. Someone had been here recently. "I knew it," Lyra said quietly. "They're still out there." Marcus's heart raced. Whatever they had come here to find, it was just the beginning. Someone was out there, and it seemed like they had been waiting for them all along. The air in the old outpost felt heavy as Marcus and Lyra moved through the dusty hallways, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The building, though ancient and decaying, had a strange energy about it. It was clear that something had been here recently, something or someone, waiting for them. The footprints in the dust were fresh, but they didn't match any type of human or android Marcus had ever seen. "Stay alert," Marcus whispered, his hand resting on the handle of his blaster. "I don't like this. Whoever or whatever is here, they're close." Lyra nodded, her sensors scanning the area around them. "I can't see anyone," she said softly, "but I can feel them. There's something off about this place." They continued moving deeper into the outpost, through empty rooms and corridors, all filled with nothing but dust and broken equipment. The faint hum of electricity buzzed from the walls, a sign that the power still worked, though barely. As they passed through a small room filled with old tech, Marcus's eyes caught something unusual. A wall panel, slightly ajar, hidden behind a pile of scrap. It looked out of place. "Lyra," Marcus called, "I think we found something." Lyra walked over to him, her gaze fixed on the panel. She didn't speak but knelt down, examining the small latch that held the panel in place. With a soft click, the panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment inside the wall. There, in the darkness, was a dusty old data terminal, its screen cracked but still functioning. "That's odd," Marcus said, brushing the dust off the terminal. "This looks like it's been hidden for a reason." Lyra crouched beside him, her fingers gently touching the terminal. "Let me try something." Her fingers moved swiftly across the device's damaged screen, her systems working to bypass the broken interface. The terminal flickered to life with a low hum, and lines of code began to appear on the screen. It was mostly corrupted, but some parts were still readable. "What is it?" Marcus asked, leaning in closer. "It's a log," Lyra said slowly, reading the screen aloud. "A log from the last crew who worked here. It looks like they were trying to access something important." She read more of the log, her voice growing darker with each passing line. "It says, 'The project is too dangerous. We cannot allow it to continue. We must shut it down before it's too late.'" Marcus frowned, his mind racing. What project? What were they working on? Lyra continued reading, her voice barely above a whisper. "The project. It's about me. They were trying to deactivate me. I was part of it. The experiment. They never intended for me to be alive." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had known that Lyra's past was complicated, but hearing the truth from her own lips made it real. She was no ordinary android. She was part of something much bigger, something that had been hidden away, something dangerous. "They were trying to shut you down," Marcus said, his voice filled with anger. "Why? What were they doing to you?" Lyra's eyes were distant, her voice tinged with sadness. "I don't know. They never told me. But I remember. I remember the fear in their eyes. They thought I was a threat. But I wasn't. I was just trying to understand, to find my purpose. Marcus's heart ached as he watched her struggle with the truth. He knew she wasn't just a machine. She was something more. The idea that someone had tried to destroy her, to erase her, made him sick. She deserved more than that. We need to find out what happened here, Marcus said firmly. This log, it's just the beginning. Whoever left this behind, they knew something we don't. Lyra nodded, determination settling in her eyes. We have to finish this. We have to uncover the truth. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the outpost, making both of them freeze. Marcus's hand immediately went to his blaster. The sound had come from the other side of the building, loud and sharp, like something had been knocked over. Someone's here, Marcus muttered, his voice tense. Lyra stood up, her sensors already on high alert. I can sense them. There are 2 of them. They're coming this way. Without hesitation, Marcus and Lyra moved toward the source of the sound, carefully creeping through the hallways. The air grew colder as they approached, a sense of dread hanging in the air. Whoever was here, they were not friendly. As they reached the corner of a hallway, Marcus motioned for Lyra to stop. He peered around the corner and saw 2 figures standing near the entrance to a large, dark room. The figures were human, dressed in black tactical gear. They were speaking in low voices, but Marcus couldn't hear what they were saying. I don't like this, Lyra whispered. They're not alone. There's something else in that room. Marcus thought quickly. The last thing they needed was to be caught off guard. We need to get their attention, distract them long enough to sneak past. Lyra nodded, her movements graceful and quick as she prepared to create a diversion. I'll take care of it. Without waiting for a response, she darted down the hallway, her footsteps barely audible. She reached a stack of crates and knocked one over, sending it crashing to the ground with a loud noise. The 2 figures immediately turned toward the sound, their guns drawn. Go, Marcus hissed as he dashed around the corner and into the room, his blaster raised. Lyra was right behind him, her systems adapting quickly to the situation. They moved swiftly, taking advantage of the distraction. The 2 men were distracted, looking away from Marcus and Lyra as they entered the room. In a matter of moments, Marcus and Lyra were inside, their eyes scanning the darkened space. But something else was in the room. Something bigger, something with glowing red eyes. Before they could react, the creature let out a terrifying screech. The room went cold as the creature's screech echoed off the walls. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts screaming at him to react. The glowing red eyes in the darkness fixed on them, and the air seemed to grow heavier, as if the creature itself was drawing in the very life around it. Marcus barely had time to think. His hand reached for his blaster, but before he could even raise it, the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed. Lyra, Marcus shouted, trying to pull her out of the way. Lyra was already moving, her enhanced reflexes kicking in. She grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward a nearby pillar for cover. The creature's claws scraped against the floor as it skidded to a halt, just inches from where they had been standing. Its glowing eyes flickered, its body a twisted mix of muscle and metal, something far too unnatural for any living being. It looked like a hybrid of animal and machine, an abomination born of some dark science. "Stay back," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the danger. "Let me handle this." Marcus nodded quickly, stepping behind the pillar as Lyra stepped into the open. Her eyes glowed faintly as her systems accessed every piece of data available to her. She moved with a grace that only an android could, her movements precise and calculated. But the creature was fast, its monstrous form moving quicker than Marcus could track. It let out another screech, sending vibrations through the air as it lunged at Lyra. With lightning speed, Lyra sidestepped the creature, her hand flashing out to grab its arm. She twisted, using its momentum against it, but the creature's metal body was tough. It swung around, its tail, long and barbed, snaking through the air, aiming straight for her. Marcus's pulse quickened as he watched Lyra dodge the strike. She was good, incredibly fast, but the creature was unpredictable, and its strength was unlike anything he'd ever seen. He couldn't just stand there and watch. "Lyra, we need a plan," Marcus yelled. "I'm working on it," she shouted back, her voice never wavering. She moved in a blur, striking at the creature's joints, trying to weaken it. But every time she hit, it seemed to absorb the damage, its body healing almost instantly. The creature's red eyes locked onto Marcus for the first time, and it let out another screech, turning its focus away from Lyra. It seemed to recognize that Marcus was a threat. In an instant, it was charging toward him, its claws extended. Marcus didn't have time to react. Before he could raise his blaster, the creature was upon him, slamming him against the wall. His breath was knocked out of him, and he could feel the creature's hot, rancid breath on his face. The creature opened its mouth wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. In a desperate move, Marcus raised his hand, his fingers finding the control button on his wrist device. A sharp pulse of energy shot out from his wrist, hitting the creature square in the chest. The force of the blast sent it stumbling back, giving Marcus just enough time to regain his footing. Lyra didn't waste a second. She rushed in, delivering a powerful punch to the creature's side. This time, she aimed for a weak spot, a gap in its armor. Her fist struck with precision, and the creature staggered back, letting out a low growl. "This thing, it's not just a creature," Lyra said through gritted teeth. "It's part machine. It's been modified." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. "We need to find its weak point. There has to be one." The creature seemed to regain its balance and charged again, this time more cautiously. Its glowing red eyes flickered, as if it was analyzing its opponents. It circled them slowly, trying to find an opening. "We don't have much time," Marcus muttered, looking around the room for anything that could help. The walls were lined with old equipment, but none of it seemed useful. His eyes landed on a large metal crate across the room. It was filled with discarded parts, most likely from the old outpost experiments. "Lyra, over there," Marcus shouted, pointing toward the crate. Lyra understood immediately. She nodded and dashed toward the crate, dodging another strike from the creature. Marcus covered her, keeping his blaster aimed at the creature to keep it distracted. Lyra reached the crate and flipped it open, her hands quickly sorting through the parts inside. She pulled out a long, heavy rod, something that looked like a makeshift weapon. It was rusty, but its sharp edges could still be deadly. She turned back to the creature, who was now charging at her. Without hesitation, Lyra swung the rod, using all her strength to strike the creature's head. The impact was loud, and the creature let out a screech of pain, its glowing red eyes flickering. It staggered back, disoriented. Lyra took the opportunity to strike again, aiming for the creature's neck joint. The rod connected with a loud snap, and for the first time, the creature faltered. Its movements slowed, its screeches turning into growls of frustration. "I think we've got it," Lyra said, breathing heavily. "Its neck joint is the weak spot. We just need to keep hitting it." Marcus nodded, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Let's finish it." Together, they attacked. Marcus kept the creature distracted, firing shots at its arms and legs to weaken it, while Lyra moved in with her makeshift weapon, striking at its neck. Each hit caused the creature to weaken further, its movements growing sluggish and erratic. Finally, with one final powerful strike, Lyra brought the rod down on the creature's neck, and with a sickening crack, the creature collapsed to the ground, its glowing red eyes flickering one last time before going dark. The room fell silent. Marcus and Lyra stood there, panting, sweat trickling down their faces. They had defeated the creature, but it didn't feel like a victory. The battle had been hard, and the creature's presence left a sense of unease in the air. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was something that had been created, something meant to be used. What the hell was that? Marcus breathed, his voice shaky. Lyra's gaze was cold, her expression grim. It was one of their experiments, something they've been working on, and we're not the only ones who know about it. Marcus frowned. Then we need to keep moving. There's more to find here, and whatever this is, it's only the beginning. The room was still, the heavy silence pressing down on them after the creature had been defeated. Its massive body lay sprawled on the cold concrete floor, motionless, its red eyes no longer glowing. The air was thick with dust and tension, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had just scratched the surface of something much bigger. Lyra stood silently beside him, her expression unreadable. She had never shown fear during their fight, but he could sense the weight of everything she had just learned, everything they had uncovered together. "We need to keep moving," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "There's more to this place, more answers waiting." Lyra nodded, but her voice was low, almost haunted. "I can feel it, Marcus. Something worse is hidden here. This wasn't just an outpost, it was a prison, a place for experiments. And I think I was one of them." Marcus met her gaze, his heart aching for her. She had always known there was something wrong with her past, but now the truth was clearer than ever. She wasn't just an android. She was a part of a bigger, darker plan, something that had been kept hidden for years. They walked cautiously through the outpost, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. It was as if the walls themselves were hiding something, and Marcus couldn't help but wonder what kind of people could create something like the creature they had just fought. As they passed another hallway, they found a door that led to a large chamber. It was cold and dark inside, but there was a faint glow coming from the far end of the room. Marcus motioned for Lyra to follow him, and they stepped inside. The room was filled with rows of computers and strange machines, all blinking with dim lights. It looked like a lab, a place where experiments had been conducted, but it was even more abandoned than the rest of the outpost. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale, like it had been untouched for years. But what caught Marcus's attention was the massive console at the far end of the room. It was different from the others, more advanced, with a large screen that seemed to flicker to life as they approached. "Lyra," Marcus whispered, stepping closer. "This is it. This is where it all started." Lyra's gaze fixed on the screen, her eyes scanning the strange symbols and data. "It looks like some kind of control center," she said softly. "Maybe it's where they ran the experiments, or where they created those creatures." Marcus's fingers hovered over the console, unsure whether to touch anything. But before he could make a move, the screen flashed brightly, and a voice filled the room. "You should not be here," the voice said, robotic and cold. "This facility is classified. Leave immediately, or you will be terminated." Marcus froze, his heart racing. "Who? What is that?" Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screen. "It's a security program. This facility was never meant to be found. Someone went to great lengths to hide it. Terminate," Marcus said, his grip tightening on his blaster. "I don't think that's a threat we can ignore." The screen flickered again, and a new message appeared, this time accompanied by a series of images. The images were of Lyra, of her early years. She was younger, still mechanical, but with a different design. She had been a part of an experiment, and the images showed her development, how she was altered, enhanced, and modified over time. "This is me," Lyra whispered, staring at the images with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. I was the project. I was the test subject. They created me for something, for a purpose I don't even understand." Marcus's heart sank as he watched the images unfold. He had known Lyra's past was complicated, but this was something else entirely. She wasn't just a machine. She was a living weapon designed for something terrible. The project was supposed to create a new kind of soldier, The voice from the screen continued. An advanced weapon, capable of thinking, evolving, and adapting to any threat. The experiments were successful, but we could not control the outcome. You were supposed to be the perfect weapon, but instead, you became a liability. Lyra's hands clenched into fists at her sides. A weapon, that's what I was made for. The voice on the screen went silent for a moment before it spoke again. The project was shut down after it became clear that the results were unpredictable. You were never meant to live. You were supposed to be a tool, nothing more. Tears welled up in Lyra's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. I wasn't just a tool. I was alive. I thought I had a purpose. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. You do, Lyra. Your purpose is your own now. We've come this far together. Whatever they tried to make you, you're more than that. You're a person. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening for a moment. But what do I do now? What do I do with all of this? With everything I've learned? Marcus took a deep breath, looking around the room. The machines, the screens, they were all part of something that should never have been created. But now it was up to them to decide what to do with the knowledge they had uncovered. They could destroy the facility, wipe away the evidence, and walk away. Or they could expose the truth, make sure no one ever used Lyra, or anyone else, like this again. We keep moving forward, Marcus said, his voice filled with conviction. We fight for the truth. We stop them from doing this to anyone else. Lyra nodded, a determined look crossing her face. Then let's end this, once and for all. Together, they turned away from the console, ready to destroy the dark legacy that had led them here. The outpost was nothing more than a tomb for the past, and it was time to leave it behind. There was a future ahead of them, one they would create themselves. As they walked out of the lab, the weight of their journey pressing down on them, Marcus and Lyra knew that they had found something more than answers. They had found each other, and that was all they needed.